welcome to Gefet in the Daf. I'm Yael Shimoni, bringing to you together with Hadran and Yeshivat Drisha, learning Daf Yomi. And today I'm going to be translating a shir that Rabbanit Yael gave from Mashahol, beautiful shir about Pidyon Shvuim. And I highly recommend that you will listen to her also in Hebrew. And she's really taking us not only in Rashi Tosfot, but also adding Ramban, Meiri, and we will finish with a tshuva, also tshuva of the Radbaz. So before we begin, we're talking about Pidyon Shvuim, and the Masechta Gittin Daf Mem Hey Amud Aleph speaks about Pidyon Shvuim and says that Pidyon Shvuim is not something that you do at any cost, but there are limits to Pidyon Shvuim. As we will see, the discussion of the Gemara is not talking about all kinds of limits. It's talking about the limits of how much money you have to invest inside Pidyon Shvuim. And of course, the sugya nowadays gives different issues because we're not talking only about money. We're also talking about other things. Medinat Yisrael had a lot of things to discuss when it came to Pidyon Shvuim. We will not get into these extra questions. We're only looking at the Gemara, looking at how much money can you spend. And of course, at the end of this Gefet, you can think what inside all we saw today is relevant to the modern question of Pidyon Shvuim. So let's begin. And I'm starting with the Gemara and the Mishnah. The Mishnah in Gittin Perik Daled Mishnah Vav says, "En podim et hashvuim yeter al kedei demehem mipnei tikun olam, ve'en mevrichin et hashvuim mipnei tikun haolam. Rashba gomer mipnei takanat hashvuim." So first of all, we see that why is this in Gittin? Because we're in Perik Tikun Olam, and here we have a limitation of Pidyon Shvuim mipnei tikun haolam. It's Masechet Gittin Perik Daled Mishnah Vav, and the Gemara asks on that, "Ibaya lehu. Hi, mipnei tikun haolam, mishum docha detziburahu, or dilma mishum delo ligavu v'lei tutfei." So the Gemara says, okay, I'm reading the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that you have to put limits on money investing in Pidyon Shvuim because of tikun olam. But tikun olam is a sentence that doesn't explain what kind of tikun olam are we talking about. So you might say it's relevant for anything, but the Gemara thinks that you have to understand exactly what was the problem so you can understand what kind of limitations were posed. So the Gemara gives us two different options, dochka de tzibura or de lo ligavu v'lei tutfei. Dochka de tzibura means because it's going to cost so much money, the tzibur won't be able to fund this. Or dilma mishum de lo ligavu v'lei tutfei. If you give a lot of money for Pidyon Shvuim, then the goyim or the shabaim will just try to get more shvuim, so you're only making the problem worse. Continues the Gemara and wants to solve what kind of reasoning is behind the limitation of the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Tashma, de Levi bar darga parke lebarte v'tleisar alfei denira de zahav. Tashma, we can prove which side are we on because we have a story that Levi bar darga actually gave a lot of money in Pidyon of his daughter. Amar Abaye, Uman leimalan de birtzon chachamim avad, dilma de lo birtzon chachamim avad. Okay, so here's an interesting situation in the Gemara. The Gemara gives a din, and then it's quoting a maise. But the maise is not a maise of a rav, it's a maise of just a person, and this person used a lot of money. So it sounds that if the person is using a lot of money, why are we saying that this is okay? If it's the problem of dochak de tzibura, here we have a person that has enough money to spend on his daughter, so that's not a problem of dochak de tzibura. But if the problem was ligavu v'lei tutfei, doing this, paying so much money for your daughter will still cause a problem. So it looks as if the Tashma gave us an answer on one side that the reason that we're doing tikkun olam is because of dochak de tzibura and not because of being afraid that more people will be taken into shevi. Abaye says this is no proof because this is just a person who knows. Maybe he did it, but it wasn't halachic. Lo birtzon chachamim avad. Continues Rashi and explains to us all of the things that I just said. Says Rashi, when you try to save someone, you have to see if the tzibur can actually take this effort. Even though the tzibur will just become poor and this person, his life will be taken, but it is still a reason not to do everything we can for this single person. This is a very important understanding of how things work also in government funds and a lot of questions. You see the yachid in front of the tzibur. או דילמה, says Rashi, דלא ימסרו עבדי כוכבים נפשה ובליגו ובלי תותפי מפני שמוכרים אותם ביוקר. maybe the problem is not דוחקת הציבור, maybe the problem is that we're just going to make this problem worse. לנפקא מינה, says Rashi, אם יש לו אב עשיר או קרוב שרוצה לפתותו בדמים הרבה, ולא יפילו על הציבור. This is why, if you have somebody with a lot of money, or if he has relatives with a lot of money, if the problem is דוחקת הציבור, you will be able to be quoted him. But if the problem is that you don't want other people to be taken, so even if you have the money, still you won't be allowed, according to Chachamim, to be quoted. And the Tashma is to prove Mishum Dochad Tzibur. So first Rashi explains the two sides of the deal, and here Rashi is a very wonderful teacher, and he gives an afkamina, and he explains how to read the story, how to understand the Gemara. Tosfot does something different. As we know, Tosfot's way of learning is last. Look at the Shatzke Kadu. He's reading one sugya, but he's bringing other sugya and says, let's see if the other sugyas work together with this sugya. And he brings us two sugyot, one in Ketubot and one further on in Gitin, that seem to say something different. Let's see Tosfot. Tosfot דיבור מתחיל דלא לגרבו. והדתניא בפרק נערה כתובות נ"ב, נשבית והיו מבקשים ממנה עד 10 בדמי הפעם ראשון פודה. So the first problem is that in Ketubot we see that there is a halakha, that even if somebody is asking for your wife more than 1, 2, 3, 4, even until 10 times as much as she's worth, you still give the money. So this is much more than Kereda Mehem. It's 10 times more. So that's one problem. And another problem in the continuation of Gitin, Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania de parke le'ahut tinok b'mamon arbe be'anizakim. So Tosfot brings these two sugyot and says, hey, we have a sugya to go talking about the pidyon shvim of your wife, and there you have to give 10 times as much as she's worth. And we also have a story later on in Agadot HaChurban that we'll see that Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania gave a lot of money for a kid that he found in Shevi. So this is not like what we see here in the Mishnah, because the Mishnah here said that you have to limit the money that you give for Shavuim. So says Tosfot, I have solutions for each Gemara. And this is mamash a classic Tosfot, how to solve the problem with other sugyot. First answer, says Tosfot, on the woman that was being taken in Ketubot, Shanei ishto dehava kegufo yoter mibito dehacha, ועל עצמו לא תקנו, שלא ייתן כל אשר לו בעד נפשו. Says Tosfot, how will we solve the contradiction between our Gemara that's talking about pidyon shvim of a daughter and saying that you have to limit yourself, and here they're talking about a wife? Says Tosfot, because wife ishto kegufo, we know this klal hilchati from other places, and even if one person would be taken in Shevi, won't tell him anything. He can take all his money and give his money for himself, because the person will do anything to survive. Also, to save his wife is the same thing, ishto kegufo, and that's why ishto is something else than the regular deen of the Mishnah, because we don't say to people things that have to do with their own flesh, and your wife is like your own flesh and not your daughter. So that's one thing that Tosfot says to solve the problem between Ketubot and Gitin. And how will we solve the problem of Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania? We're not talking about any relatives. This is not your wife. This is not your daughter. It's just a kid that he's being taken away from Shevi. Says Tosfot a very interesting thing. Okay. Says Tosfot, because this child that Rabbi Yoshua ben Hanania saved from the Shevi was very, very, very wise. He saved him because he knew that somebody who's very wise, you give all the money in the world and you don't go according to the law of the Mishnah. This is a different category. Inami, says Tosfot, b'shvat churban habayit lo shayach delo ligrev. Another answer is because it wasn't the churban, all of the Mishnah is irrelevant. So here we have to understand these two siyagim that Tosfot added, because the first siyag, he said, the din of the Mishnah is not relevant to a person on his own body, and therefore not about his wife, and not if you're muflag b'chukma and sh'ara churban. What's the logic between these two new siyugim? First, before we'll understand that, let's look at another Tosfot, the Tosfot in Gitin Nunched, on the story of the kid who was being saved from Shevi. He gives another explanation of what is also relevant to the din of our Mishnah. Says Tosfot there, כי איכא סכנת נפשות פודין שבויים יותר על דמיהן, כדאמרינן בפרק השולח, אינמי משום דמופלג בחוכמה הווה. So there we see that Tosfot repeats the idea that somebody who's very smart, you will take him out of Shevi and give much more money, but he also adds sakanat nefashot. So let's try to understand these four siyugim that Tosfot gave us. What is the sense behind each one of them? Okay, so ishto, gufo, and a person, we can understand that, but we understand it intuitively. I want to take it a little further. So if we look at this idea that Chachamim can say something to a person, but when it comes to his self, he won't give this limitation, this might be a deep understanding that Chachamim leave the intuition and the natural deeds of a person when it comes to protecting his own life, and they say, I can't touch this. This is something that I won't put halakha on. I won't be saying anything midrabanan when it comes to your intuition of keeping yourself alive. So that's the first idea that the Tosfot showed us. The second idea of muflag b'chokhmah, that is something that we will see Ramban and Meiri each give a different explanation. Why? If somebody is very, very wise, that's reason to give more money for him. I think you're still facing the same questions that you had in our Mishnah. So we will leave that for a discussion in a minute. And then we have these two other ideas, sakanat nefashot and the idea of churban habayit. Churban habayit is something that I think is the easiest part to understand. Churban habayit means that if everybody here anyway is being kidnapped because everything is destroyed, you can't be a kehila that makes all kinds of questions. Will more people come and take more people? No, the whole community now is totally wrecked. So you're not afraid that it will get worse. This is the worst that it has ever been. So when you're in the worst situation, you just try to save as much as you can, because you know that nothing that you will do will change the attitude of people towards the community. So that's the idea of churban habayit, and that can really make sense that when we're in a situation of total churban, and we know that Am Yisrael, chutz michurban habayit, face such situations in Galut, then you do anything that you can. That makes perfect sense. The Mishnah talked about a normal situation when you have a community when sachakol people are not being kidnapped on a regular basis, you're not destroying the entire community, then you put limitations, but not if we're in a total churban situation. But sakanat nefashot, that's pretty surprising. Many, many times Shevi involves sakanat nefashot. And still the Tosfot here brings it as an option to say that the Mishnah is irrelevant. And if Tosfot here is right, the din of the Mishnah will be very, very, very small, because whenever there is sakanat nefashot, or even a chance that there is sakanat nefashot, you will give all the money in the world. So this is a very surprising thing that the Tosfot says here in Gitin Nun Chen, and we will see that the Ramban will not agree with this. And of course, we have to understand more. Why do we give more money for somebody who's smart than people who are not as smart? So in order to understand this, let's move to the Ramban and to the Meiri. The Ramban in our sugya says, יש אומרים, בכל היכד דאיכא חששא דמיתא פודין אותו בכל ממון שיכולים לפדותו. He quotes Tosfot in Daf Nun Hey, saying that sakanat nefashot might make a difference. And the Ramban doesn't like to see what he says. ולא מסתבר. דכל שבי כולהו יתנאו בה. ועוד לגבי אישה, ייקח חששא דאריות ולא חששו. ואף על גב דקרקע העולם היא, היה להם לחוש. This is a very important Ramban for two reasons. First, the Ramban here tells us, go to Masechta Baba Basra. There in Daf Chet, you will see that when the Gemara says that Pidyon Shvuin is such an important mitzvah, it's because Pidyon Shvuin has all the kinds of deaths inside it, because you don't know what will happen to you. And therefore, it says, Ramban, if Tosfot is right, then any person who's been taken in Shevi, you will be podeh, and the Mishnah is irrelevant. So this can't be true. We have to keep the text somewhere. And if we will accept this idea that if you have a chashash of mavet, any person who's been taken into custody, you will be podeh him as an est. It's a very, very weird situation. So the Ramban says this doesn't make sense, because if this is true, our all sugya is meaningless. And another reason, says the Ramban, which is very interesting, says Ramban, if you're afraid of death, you should fear also other things, because we know that not only death is something that is totally horrible, that you have to in any cost save somebody. Also a riot. And women are more prone to be sakanat harayot in Shevi. And here the Ramban says something very important. If you learn sugya and Sanhedrin, you'll see how important it is. Even though halachically, if a woman is raped, she is not considered somebody who's doing a deed. She's not being over an avera. But of course, the rape is something that is horrible for her. We're not looking at the halachic point of this. We're not asking, oh, is she over an avera or not? If she is in a situation that she might be raped, even though halachically it is not as problematic as if she's doing something chote, mamash, active, still we would have to consider that also. And then any woman who would be taken into custody would have to be put to her in any kind of amount. So this is the Ramban that says when I'm looking at the question of rape and a riot, I'm not checking the halachic details. If somebody is under a situation that she might be raped, this is like sakanat nefashot to us. And if the idea of Tosfot would be true, all the shvuim, including women, any chashash, not only chashash ma, but also chashash of a riot, even though it's not an active deed, not halachic, because it's a natural thing, we would have to be putting them for any money in the world. And that's why he does not accept this, because he says, still the Mishnah is saying you can't do any money, even though these two things might happen. Okay, so first we saw the Ramban went against the fourth view of the Tosfot, and how the Ramban will give an explanation for why somebody who's so smart, you have to be put in. Says the Ramban, talmid chacham podim oto bechol makom shebaolam. So first we see that the Ramban changes muflag bechokma letalmid chacham, and he says this kid who was taken from Shevi for a lot of money, that's because it wasn't only he was smart, he was a talmid chacham. And why? Why we change this? Explains the Ramban, ולקה משום דוחקה ולא משום מגרוי. ואם איבדו ישראל ממון ומתו משונאיהם הרבה, יש לנו כיוצא בהם. ותלמיד חכם אין לנו כיוצא בו. וקודם לפדות למלך, כדאית במסכת הוריות, לכך אין לחמוד כסף וזהב עליו. ורבי יהושע, משום שהכיר בו בוודאי שהוא תלמיד ותיק, טעו בממון הרבה. Says the Ramban, I'm adding another sugya. If you go to the end of Horayot, you will see that there's a whole set of who do you put it before who. And you have there a very interesting deen that if you have a melech and a Talmid Chacham Mamzer, who do you choose? You choose the Talmid Chacham. And says the Ramban, it's because Talmidei Chachamim, you don't have a lot of them. And they're very, very rare and very, very important. Other things you might find substitutes for them. It's hard to say, but every person has a substitute. Money and also lives, says the Ramban. But Talmidei Chachamim, because they're crucial for the survival of Israel and they don't have a substitute, that's why we will be putting them in Omamon Shabaolam. And says the Ramban, that's the story that Rabbi Yoshua saw that this kid, even though he was young, will be a Talmid Chacham later, and that's why he was put to him. Continues the Ramban and says, ואי קשיא, אחד אמרינם בפרק הנזיקים, העבודה לא זז מכאן, שהפנינו בכל מקום בעולם שפוסקים עליי, אמרו, לא זז משם עד שפדור ממון הרבה. ויש לומר, דהתה משעת חורבן, ולקה משום דמיגו ותפי, שהרי כולם בשבי הלכו. הינמי רבי יהושע דעבד לגרמי דעבד, ותנא קמא דפליג עלי דרשב"ג, היינו רבי יהושע, ולא סלקא לקבתי. Says the Ramban, if you look at the Gemara in Nizakin, you will see that it doesn't sound like the story was Talmid Chacham. It sounds like he Dafka wanted to be put in him stam. And he gives two different explanations. One, what we saw already in the Tosfot, B'shat Churban Habayit. Because it's Shat Churban Habayit. Anyway, everybody will be taken b'shevi, so that's why you can do whatever you want. And then the Ramban adds another suggestion. Inami Rabbi Yoshua de'avad lekarmei u'de'avad. What's this? The Ramban says, there you have the story about Rabbi Yoshua. Maybe Rabbi Yoshua is cholek on the din of the Mishnah. And you see a story of Rabbi Yoshua, it's because he does not agree with Rashbag. And then we have a machloket between the sugya and Gitin Memhein, the sugya, and Gitin Memchet. Okay. יש אומרים שאותו שפדה תלמיד היה בצור במרבנן חייבים לפדות בכל ממון שבעולם. Another answer is, excuse me, this is not the Ramban, we're in the Meir. Okay, up till now I'm just summing up again the Ramban. The Ramban said the teretz of the Tosfot is sakanat nefashot, I'm ditching, because if that's true, all Bidyon Shvuim will change, the din of the Mishnah will be irrelevant. But Talmid Chacham I understand, and he explained, and I also understand that maybe we have a machloket here between sugya. The Meiri gives a different explanation for Talmid Chacham, because the Ramban gave rational explanations, but also explaining how Torah is the most important thing for Am Yisrael. That's why we put all the money on that. The Meiri says something different. ויש אומרים, says the Meiri, on our Gemara, שאותו שפדה תלמיד היה, מצווה מרבנן חייבים לפתותו בכל מקום שבעולם. So he here gives the explanation that he was a Talmid Chacham, this kid that was saved by Rabbi Yoshua. וליקה משום איגרוי, שתורתו משמרתו. אף על פי שגרם החטא ונכשל עכשיו, כל שכן שתלמיד חכם אין לו תמורה. So the last sentence is like the Ramban. כל שכן תלמיד חכם אין לו תמורה. תלמיד חכם, somebody that money is nothing in front of a תלמיד חכם. But what he said before, I think Rabbanit Chana and I understand it slightly different. I'll try to explain what Rabbanit Chana says, and then I'll see how I read it. What Rabbanit Chana said is that this is not a rational explanation that the Meiri here adds. That the Meiri goes to areas that are more ruchani and say that when it comes to Torah, Torah is a whole different field. And here we have a Talmid Chacham, so we move to other rules. I think I understand it's slightly different, but I haven't spoken to her. Maybe we agree here. To me, it sounds like here is another sugya being quoted. Again, the sugya in Baba Batra, Rabbanan lo tzrichen et tiruta. And that sugya says that if somebody is Talmid Chacham, he is actually safe. So it's true that this Talmid Chacham is not safe. Obviously, he's been taken b'shevi, so he's not safe. But what says the Meiri that if we will be poda him, he won't be taken so easily again, or other Talmidei Chachamim will not be taken easily again. So let's see. If you're a regular person, you don't give a lot of money, so that's why people won't just take people on the street. But Goyim might decide that, oh, Talmidei Chachamim, they have a high budget for Talmidei Chachamim. We'll just keep taking Talmidei Chachamim. The Meiri says, don't worry, Talmidei Chachamim are not so vulnerable. Talmidei Chachamim have the shmirah of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore we allow ourselves to put a lot of money because we're not afraid that our investment here will create a bigger problem because we have the Haganah of the Torah and of the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So this might be also a rational explanation. Again, a rational explanation built on the idea that Torah is something that protects the person who is a Talmid Chacham. So let's sum up what we saw up till now, because we really saw answers to textual problems. What was the textual problem? We have the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that you have to limit the amount of money that you use, but we have two other Gemarot that the Tosfot gave us. One in Ketubah, that you give a lot of money for your wife, and the other in Gittin itself, that would be Yoshua, was podeh a kid for a lot of money. And that's how we found that there are four different sugim to the Mishnah. And the Mishnah that seemed to be like a very general and big rule becomes a much smaller rule. One is that you or your wife, that's something that halakha doesn't tell you what to do. Because a person will do anything to survive, and also his wife is ishto kegufu. The second explanation is churban habayit. Because churban habayit, we're not afraid that it will become worse. It's as worse as it can be, so that's why you can put any kind of money. That's how to explain why Rabbi Yoshua take this tinok out of Shevi. Two was Talmid Chacham. Here we had two different explanations, Ramban and Meiri, with slight differences. Ramban says en tmurato, and the Meiri agrees with that. Talmid Chacham en tmurato, and the Ramban quotes Barayot. But the Meiri also is quoting Baba Basra saying that Talmid Chacham Torato Mishamarto. And I understand that therefore it means that there's not we're not afraid that Goyim will take more Talmidei Chachamim because the Torah is protecting them and they won't be such an easy catch for the Goyim. Number three is Shevi Shesh Bo Sakanat Nefashot. That's what the Tosfot offered, and the Ramban disagreed with this because the Ramban says in any Shvi there's Sakanat Nefashot, and also Sakanat Arayot would be the same thing, and that's why he disagrees with this. Is Chalket Tosfot Ramban. And fourth explanation that the Ramban brings, which is not a siyuk to the Mishnah, it's just saying Rabbi Yoshua is cholik on the Mishnah, and that's why you see the difference between Gittin and Daf Mem and Daf Nun Chet. So up till now, we really went on how to read a Gemara, and we saw how this Gemara, really the problem arises from how to read it in light of other places than Shas. But we want to finish with a very interesting tshuva of the Radbaz. The Radbaz is not asking a textual question like the Tosfot did. The Radbaz is asking a question how do we look at Pidyon Shvuim and about the minhag of Am Yisrael? Because if we look at this halakha of the Mishnah, we will see that is very far than what Jews have done, at least at the time of the Radbaz. So let's begin the question. שאלת ממני, דעתי, או דעתי על הדתנן אין פודין את השבויים יתר על כדי דמיהן, יהווה דמיהן כעבד הנמכר בשוק, או יהווה דמיהן כמי שנמכרים השבויים עקום. So first the Radbaz says, I have a textual question, how to read the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, יתר על כדי דמיהן, how much is a person costing? Usually in other areas, למשל, נזיקין and Baba Kama, we go and we see how much a person is worth as a slave. And that would not be so expensive. Or do we look at how much the Umot HaOlam, Akum, are paying for their shvuim? The answer of the Radbaz. כבר נהגו כל ישראל לפדות את השבויים יתר מכדי דמיהם הנמכרים בשוק, שהרי זקן או קטן אין שווה בשוק יותר מ10 דינרים, פודים אותו בכף או יותר. וטעמה דמנהגה הוא משום נקמלן טעמה הוא דין מליגו ולייטו וינצרו עצמם לשבות מהם. הרי אנו רואים שבזמן הזה שהשבעים אין יוצאים לכתחילה בשביל ישראל אלא לכל מי שימצאו, לכך אפילו שפודים אותם יותר ממה ששווה בשוק, כיוון שאין פודים אותם יותר ממה שנקנים שאר עכו"ם, מותר המנח להם לישראל שהם גומלי חסד בני גומלי חסד. So first says the Radbaz, the mehen means not how much they're worth in the slave market, but how much goyim would pay for a similar person, and we see it's a much, much higher price. And why is that? Why is that the minhag? Why are Am Yisrael giving so much money for their shavuim? Says the Radbaz, it's because we learned the sugya that the time is that we're afraid that people will come and take more shavuim from Am Yisrael, because as Abaye, we understood that that person who gave a lot of money for his daughter was not Birtzor Chachamim. And since we understand that that's the reason, so we check how much money do Goyim use in their Pidyon Shvuim, because we will just match our Pidyon Shvuim to theirs. And that's the higayon behind the minhag. Continue the Radbaz and says, I can prove this also from the Mishnah. Says the Radbaz, notice the language of the Mishnah. The Mishnah didn't say shovi, it says damim. Damim means how much people pay. Shovi means how much is people worth in the slave market. Okay, so what we saw in Radbaz up till now is that he's giving the reasons of the Gemara and he's also reading it inside the words of the Mishnah. But now the Radbaz continues, and then we see that what bothers the Radbaz is not textual problems in the Mishnah and the Gemara, but how to deal with the reality of his time. If we look at what Jews do, they're giving more money than Goyim. They're giving really, really all the money in the world. So it looks as if the minhag here is directly against the Gemara and the Mishnah in Memhei. It's not only the siyugim that we saw, the 4 siyugim that we saw in the rishonim. People are just giving tons of money. It doesn't matter if it's your wife, if it's your daughter, if it's a Talmid Chacham or a Stam person. Jews are putting the shvuim much more also than the goyim. Yesh lomar, says the Radbaz, dessamchu al echad min gimel ta'amim. He has to explain how can Am Yisrael do this. 3 different reasons. Chada, sheyesh akum shvuim shepodim oto be'erech zeh. First answer says, no, this is still according to what Umot HaOlam does, because some Umot Olam have a lot of money, so they give a lot of money for the shvuim. Since there is somebody in the world who's doing the same thing, Jews match themselves to the most expensive, and since also Goyim do a very, very high price on their shvuim if they have the money, so Am Yisrael does that. Okay, so that's the first answer. Inami, Shema yesh betocham chacham. Wow. Okay, so here the Radbaz says, remember that we talked about the Talmidei Chachamim, how they're special. So if somebody's shavui, we say, maybe he's a chacham, or if it's a group, maybe one of them is a chacham, maybe there will become future chachamim. So this idea that the chacham is being mifda for any kind of money will actually be a halachic way to allow us to be poda anyone with a lot of money. It's a very interesting movement here with this tam of the chacham. או שמא, says the Radbaz, something new, יש בהם קטנים ויעבירו על דת. נמצא שאין לנו פודים אלא הדת. בדרך כלל כופים אותם לחלל שבתות. מייסרים אותם ביצורים קשים ממוות. Okay, so says the Radbaz here something new that we didn't see בכלל before. If a child is being taken in Shevi and we're poding him, it's not being poded the child it's putting the religion. Because when a child is being taken, he will be forced to stop being Jewish. And then when we give the money, it's not for him, it's for religion. So this is very interesting because it is a way to save this child, but saying, oh, no, we're not saving the child, we're saving the religion. Okay, that's the third explanation. And he finishes and says, Vitu. No, before he finishes and says, he has here a statement that he shows us that he himself feels that all the tamim that he gave are not so strong. ואף על פי, says the Radbaz, שיש לבעל הדין לומר על כל התנאים הללו, אומר התנא, אין פודים את השבויים יותר מכדי דמיהם. מכל מקום, דין מה יש לדחות, לא היה התנא בשבויים דהיתבעו כולן דאמרן. וכיוון שהדבר בספק, הנח להם לישראל ויחזיקו במידה, כיוון שהם שמחים וששים בה, יש להם זה שכר גדול. Says the Radbaz, I gave these three explanations, but I feel that this does not really work with the Mishnah and the Gemara and Daf Mem Hey. That's what you want to tell me, says the Radbaz. Yael, you want to be mitvakach with me and tell me how can you do this? It's against the Gemara. So I'll tell you, since you can't prove yourself, it's a suffix. Maybe the Mishnah and the Gemara agrees with me, and the real reason I think. הנח להם לישראל ויחזיקו במידה כיוון שהם שמחים וששים בה יש להם בזה שכר גדול. Says the Radbaz, that's what Jews do. And since it's a safek, and as we saw, it's not such a big safek, but it's a safek, he says, so hanach lahem liYisrael. And the last statement of the Radbaz, ותו, שאין לנו כופין אותן, אלא הם מעצמם מתנדבים. Says the Radbaz, the din of the Mishnah is only what you tell people to do. But if on their own accord they give money, it's their business. Does this work with the Mishnah and the Gemara? I think this is also problematic. So what we saw here, I'll sum up again, we see that we have two different problems. One problem is how to work with the different Gemara, and we had 4 different explanations. A different problem is how to work with the minhag, that we see that people give a lot of money for children who have been taken, and also for some people, not Talmidei Chachamim, not your wife, not Bisman Churban HaBayit. How could it be? So here the Radbaz says, we're talking about Yeladim Ktanim, maybe we're saving religion. And the other explanation was, this is not because we told them to do it, it's because they choose to do, and that's why it's okay. And the third explanation is, it's a suffix in the Mishnah, and we don't know. And if you have a suffix, and Am Yisrael is doing something against the suffix, hanach lahem liYisrael, and that's the tshuva of the Radbaz. So today, we really took time to learn a whole sugya. I think it's not a whole, there's more written on Pidyon Shvuim, and as we said before, this is only talking about money. How about other things? Hostages and chablim instead of shvuim. All of these modern questions, of course, will be framed here also, and we'll have to think about them. We did not discuss them in this year. We only talked about money. And what we saw is that the 2 problems we had here, one, how to read this Gemara when we look at other Gemara, which is really how the Tosfot learns, and we saw here different explanations. And then we saw that the Radbaz says, you see, Am Yisrael, they're being Kodesh Vurim in all money of the world, so it looks like they were going straight against this Mishnah and the Gemara, and he tries to resolve it, even though it does not work with the text, but still it looks as if reality here, in some ways, beat the text. And Minhag Yisrael became the din here. So I hope you enjoyed this shir, and B'ezrat Hashem we'll be learning more and meeting again next week with another shir of Rabbanit Yael. Take care and enjoy.